Why was Charles Dickens so insistent on including the theme of family in his novella, A Christmas Carol? Let's find out. Hey, what's going on, Revision Squad? It's me, Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie, and in this video we're going to focus on the theme of family and how it is used in Charles Dickens' novella, A Christmas Carol. To do that, we're going to have a think about some important contextual information, look at some key quotations, and I'll even provide some ever crucial analysis as well, all of which I hope helps you out in your studies. Now this video will be covering quite a bit, so do go and grab a pen and some paper so you can make some notes as you watch or listen. And also, if you do find this video to be helpful, useful or even interesting, please do let me know by giving it a like, dropping a comment to let me know, subscribing to my channel if you aren't already, and sharing it with your friends, classmates and maybe even your teachers as well. I know it's always pretty cringe when people on YouTube say stuff like this, but genuinely, your support really does mean a lot. So if you are able to show some appreciation, that would be awesome. Okay, so I promised some contextual information, so here it is. For most exam boards, the ability to apply contextual information to your analysis of A Christmas Carol is super important. But the thing is, you can't do that if you don't know any context, right? So here we go. First of all, I should probably start this section of the video by telling you that the family unit was of great significance in the Victorian era. Now this piece of information totally underpins our entire discussion of Victorian families. Now this significance was caused by a number of factors. For instance, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert had quite a large family, 9 kids in total, although only 3 were born by the time A Christmas Carol came out. The royal family were seen as role models for the rest of society to follow, and so large families became more and more commonplace. To have a large family made you more closely resemble the Queen, after all, and having more in common with the Queen, well, that makes you a better Victorian. Another reason that the family unit was so important in the Victorian era was that home life was seen as an escape from the relentless business world of the Industrial Revolution. With individuals having to work long, hard hours, it was important for them to have somewhere pleasant to relax at the end of the day. And a strong family, well, that would help with that. For the working class, however, having a strong family was important for different reasons. If a working class family had lots of children, the family's earning potential would be higher, given that children were sent to work in the Victorian era. Furthermore, a large, close family would have also provided some much needed emotional comfort for families who would have faced frequent challenges in their day-to-day lives, challenges brought about by their impoverished states. Now, thinking more broadly, Victorian families often had very fixed gender roles. The father was seen as the head of the household. He would earn money and provide for his family, and more often than not would also be quite stern and distant from his children, at least in the higher social classes. Women were expected to be good wives and mothers, and would have a bit more of an active presence in their children's lives, although upper-class mothers would still be quite distant by today's standards. Finally, playing music and singing songs were a common way that Victorian families would entertain themselves and each other. Now, I know this isn't exactly the most exciting piece of context for us to know, but it is worth us thinking how and where this might appear in Dickens' story. So, if that gives us an overview of why the family unit was important in the Victorian era, as well as some details about how it functioned in this time, where is the theme of family evident in A Christmas Carol? Let's have a look at some quotations, yeah? Okay, before we get into analysing some quotations, I just want to remind you, as per usual, that all the page numbers I use in this video refer to this edition of A Christmas Carol. So if you have a different edition, odds are that our page numbers won't be exactly the same, but I hope I still make it pretty clear whereabouts in the story each quotation comes from. So, quotation number 1 can be found quite early on in the story's first stave, once we are at Scrooge's place of work. A jolly voice shouts out at the old miser as the narration reveals that the owner of the voice, Fred, had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, and his breath smoked again. Now, it's all well and good that I, read a bit of the story out, but what can we say about this quotation, especially in relation to the theme of family? Well, I would say that this quotation connects Fred with the idea of warmth. Previously in the stave, we were told that external heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge, and only moments before Fred arrives, Bob Cratchit can be seen trying to warm himself up. And now we have a character who has heated himself by walking so swiftly, is glowing much like a fire, and has breath that smoked, which also obviously has connotations of warmth. Now, at this point in the story, Fred is the only family member of Scrooge's that we know about, and so if Fred is warm, we can also equate this to Scrooge's family, or to family more generally. But the question is Fred only literally warm, or is he figuratively warm as well? His initial dialogue seems rather jolly and positive and well-wishing, and so we could also say that Fred, and by extension family, is a source of warmth as well, emotional warmth that is. Family, simply put, is shown to be a positive thing. Next up, I want to consider 2 instances of dialogue, one spoken by Fred to his uncle and one from Scrooge to Bob Cratchit. Both of these examples come from stave 1. Firstly, we see Fred imploring his uncle. "I want nothing from you, I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends?" And then later on, Scrooge asserts to Bob Cratchit that asking for Christmas Day off, and asking for it to be paid no less, is a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But what does this tell us about family? Well, it shows us how these 2 characters, despite being related perhaps, hold contrasting views about family. When Fred protests that he wants and asks nothing of Scrooge, the repetition of nothing is important, I think. He is making it clear that he sees family as something that does not come associated with any sort of cost. Family is just family. It isn't dependent on receiving any goods or favours or, well, anything in return. For Scrooge, however, family is but a financial expenditure. Rather than seeing Bob Cratchit's request to have Christmas Day off as an inherently nice thing, it must be quite nice for Bob to be able to spend Christmas Day with his family after all. Scrooge instead frames it in financial terms, equating it to picking a man's pocket. In this piece of dialogue, then, we see that Scrooge doesn't really see or understand the inherent value of family, which might explain why he has apparently rejected it for so long. Alright, we're now going to skip to stave 2 and look at how the theme of family has been used there. To start with, I want to look at a piece of narration that occurs after Scrooge has observed his adolescent self at boarding school. Scrooge stops watching his former self and then looks at the ghost and with a mournful shaking of the head, glanced anxiously at the door. So what, Liam, you might ask? What does this have to do with family? Well, I think it's pretty apparent that Scrooge is exhibiting heightened negative emotions in this part of the story, as shown by the semantic field of negativity evoked by the emotion-based words mournful and anxiously in this passage. Now, I'm sure you all know that Scrooge's now dead sister, Fan, is soon to enter the scene. But the thing is, Scrooge does too. This is his memory after all. So if Scrooge is suddenly experiencing heightened negative emotions at the thought of his little sister bursting onto the scene, it probably is not a huge leap for us to say that Scrooge is sad about her death. What does this tell us about family then? Well, it tells us that family can be a source of pain. As much as our families are capable of bringing great joy to our lives, when our family members die, that brings great sadness with it. Might this loss explain why Scrooge rejects family and becomes as self-contained and solitary as an oyster? Maybe. Our next quotation comes only moments later in stave 2, when Fan tells Scrooge that he is leaving boarding school and returning home. In her dialogue, she explains, "Father is so much kinder than he used to be that home's like heaven. He spoke so gently to me one dear night when I was going to bed that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home." Now, I think that this is actually a really interesting quotation, as it poses a few questions about Scrooge's family. Firstly, because Fan has used the comparative adjective kinder when describing her father, which has also been emphasised by the intensifier much, we get the impression that Scrooge's dad was not particularly pleasant to his children when they were growing up, which makes me wonder if Scrooge's father was cruel or if he was just typical of upper-class fathers during the Victorian times. As I mentioned earlier, upper-class fathers at this time tended to be much more distant with their children and were really quite stern, strict and formal than most parents are today. They expected to be called sir and often stayed out of the way of their children, spending lots of time in their home offices, if they had them, which their children were usually forbidden from entering unless given express permission. As such, maybe Scrooge's dad wasn't so exceptionally cruel and was just normal for the time. Secondly, if Fan has asked her father once more if Scrooge was allowed to return home, we get the impression that she has probably asked quite a few times before, and can then perhaps infer that Scrooge has been away from his family home for quite some time. This makes me ask then, does Scrooge's absence from his family explain why he does not understand or value family? Does this quotation in fact help us to understand Scrooge better? Does it make him less of a villain and more a victim of circumstance? I'll leave that for you to decide. And now I would like to focus on the end of stave 2, particularly on the scene in which Scrooge observes Belle, his former fiancée, and her family. Scrooge pays particular attention to Belle's daughter, and the narration reveals his innermost thoughts. The narration says, "And when he thought that such another creature, quite as graceful and as full of promise, might have called him father, and been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, his sight grew very dim indeed." But what does this have to do with the theme of family? Well, I would say that Scrooge's reflection and reaction implies that he regrets not having a family of his own. You see, Scrooge thinks about having a daughter as graceful and full of promise as Belle's daughter, and recognises that she would have been a springtime in the haggard winter of his life, meaning that she would have been a source of great joy and vitality and maybe even beauty for him in his old age. And when he thinks about this possibility, his sight grows very dim indeed. The negative connotations of Scrooge's sight dimming suggests that he is sad, I think, as the beauty and radiance and brightness of his fantasy is being muted and reduced, showing that Scrooge is aware that this imagined reality will never come true for him. Not now. All of this makes me think that Scrooge regrets not having a family of his own, and perhaps this regret is intensified because he did not have a family with Belle in particular. You could argue that by making Scrooge regret this, Dickens is trying to really emphasise the importance of family, because if someone as cold and mean-spirited as Scrooge can see how significant family is, then It must be really important. Okay, I think that's enough about stave 2. Let's look at stave 3 instead. Now, during this part of the story, we spend an awful lot of time with the Cratchits, and so it should be no surprise to you that I'm going to talk about them for at least a little bit. Now, there is absolutely loads and loads that could be said about the Cratchits with regards to the theme of family, but I would like to focus on a comment made about them in the narration right at the end of their part of stave 3. This comment reads, "There was nothing of high mark in this. They were not a handsome family, they were not well dressed, their shoes were far from being waterproof, but they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time." Now this quotation, or the first half of it at least, is incredibly negative. It focuses on what the Cratchits are not, or on what they do not have, rather than on what they are and what they do have. Their Christmas celebrations do not bear a high mark, meaning it wasn't particularly high quality. They are not a handsome family, which I think means that they are not well off, given that handsome can mean substantial in a numerical or financial sense, rather than Dickens just outright calling them an ugly family. Their shoes and clothes are also quite lacking in terms of quality. However, despite this, they are happy, grateful, and pleased with one another. This suggests that despite their lack of wealth, the Cratchits are happy and lead satisfactory lives because they have each other. I think this raises some really important questions. For the working class in Victorian Britain, did having a strong, loving family trump poverty? Does the love that the Cratchits share make their otherwise difficult lives easier? Is this Dickens's way of telling his middle and upper class readers that the working class value family really strongly too, just like they did, and as such foreground some similarities shared between the various social classes? After all, if a middle or upper class reader saw this and felt that the working class people were just like them, would this not have increased sympathy for the working class, which is perhaps Dickens's ultimate aim with this story? I think all of that is indeed possible. Maybe this shows that Dickens intentionally used an emotive theme, family, so that he could more successfully spread his story's message. Now we're going to stay in stave 3 for a little while longer, but now we're going to have a think about how Fred and his family and friends celebrate Christmas. The two quotations that we're going to look at come just a small handful of pages after the last one, and they are "Ha ha, ha 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 ha," and "After tea they had some music, for they were a musical family and knew what they were about." But what can we say about these quotations? Well, I would say that the laughter presents Fred and his family in a positive light, because they are having such a great deal of fun. Now this fun continues when they play music and sing only a couple of pages later, which also suggests that they are actually quite a typical, normal Victorian family, because we know that music and singing were common activities for families to engage in, don't we? If this family is both normal and really good, Dickens is able to use Fred's family as a means of celebrating all of the normal middle and upper class families out there. Now psychologically, this was a pretty clever tactic for Dickens to use. You see, if there is a character or group of characters that remind you of yourself, and they are praised in the story, or at least shown to be good people, you might feel a little bit flattered. That's because if the characters are praised and they're also like you, then the author's praise probably also applies to you as well. Feeling flattered, a reader is more likely to enjoy the story and agree with, or at least go along with, its message. And so in the case of A Christmas Carol, by praising normal middle and upper class Victorian families, Dickens is trying to flatter his readership so that they more successfully take on the moral of his story. That's pretty clever, Charles, but I see what you're doing there. We're now going to jump to Stave 4 and return to our good friends the Cratchit family. In this dark future in which Tiny Tim is dead, the Cratchit household is a pretty sombre place to be. Unable to keep himself together, Bob Cratchit has an emotional outburst, which we can see from his dialogue. "My little child," cried Bob. "My little child." Now, with the theme of family in mind, I would say that this quotation shows Dickens de-romanticising the idea of the family by showing just how much pain it can bring when a family member dies, which is really emphasised by Bob's repetition of little and little child, because it suggests that in his devastation he isn't really able to come to terms with Tiny Tim's death. Now, I reckon Dickens chose to de-romanticise the notion of family in this way in order to remind his middle and upper class readership of the harsh realities of working class life, in which it was not uncommon to lose children and siblings and relatives due to illness or work-based accidents. If family was so important to the Victorians, then showing them how the conditions of working class life resulted in the death of family members would have been quite shocking for Dickens's readers, and may have been another way he nudged them towards adopting his more socially conscious view. Right, we're now going to jump right to the end of the story. So this quotation and the next one will come from Stave 5, okay? First of all, I want to spend a moment talking about Scrooge's appearance at Fred's Christmas celebrations. We are told that Scrooge was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did Topper when he came. So did the plump sister when she came. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. Now, in terms of analysis, I think this is quite an easy piece of writing to discuss. Firstly, at home in 5 minutes shows us just how easily Scrooge slots into family life once he has opened his heart up towards others. And secondly, I think that this shows Dickens once again celebrating the family unit, especially for the happiness and joy that it can bring, shown by the repetition of wonderful, which marks this piece of writing as demonstrating typically Victorian values. And finally, let's turn our attention to the very end of the story. From the narration, we learn Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. Now, you won't be surprised when I say that it is the phrase second father in particular that I want to look at here when thinking about the theme of family. A good father, or parent, or family member more generally, might have been seen as the epitome of goodliness in Victorian Britain, given the increasing importance placed on family at the time. If Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were viewed as paragons of virtuosity at the time this story was written, and a significant part of their identities was wrapped up in their familial roles, then it could be argued that to be a good parent or family member was the equivalent of being a good Victorian. As such, by giving Scrooge the status of second father to Tiny Tim, himself a really pitiable character which only emphasises Scrooge's fatherliness, I think, Dickens marks the completion of Scrooge's redemption. He is no longer the mean old miser, but is instead an enormously positive figure. Phew! Alright, that is my analysis of all of those quotations complete, but don't close the video just yet, because I still have a summary, question, and some extra ideas for you as well. Now, if we wanted to summarise Dickens's use of the theme of family in his novella, we could say that the family unit was of great significance in Victorian Britain, thanks in part to the royal family. Dickens's novella can be seen as a celebration of the family unit's role in Victorian Britain. It shows how having a close family enables people to persevere in spite of immense adversity, allows them to spread joy and love at Christmas time, and can transform and redeem even the most cold, selfish, and miserly of individuals. Now, this summary ticks a number of boxes. It includes some context, uses an evaluative verb, and contains 3 discrete ideas, each of which could prompt its own detailed analytical paragraph. Now, it might be a good idea for you to pause the video now and copy down the summary. That way, you're going to have something relatively short that might act as a sort of cheat sheet to the overall presentation of family in the story. Or it might even work quite nicely as an overview or introduction for an essay. And before I finish, I've got some additional next steps for you as well. So first of all, if you wanted to, you could answer the question that has just appeared on screen. Which family unit is the most important to A Christmas Carol, and why? Now, you could use this to prompt a mind map, use it to make a flashcard, have it as a topic to debate if you're revising with friends, or even use it as the title for a short essay. Now, if you really fancy doing that last option, you are more than welcome to pop your ideas down in the comments section. Seeing your comments always brightens up my day, and I'm usually pretty good at giving feedback to student work as well. Or if you don't fancy doing that, why not consider these additional ideas? Why not think about how and why Dickens might have referred to loads of other random families throughout the novella, especially in the third stave when Scrooge is travelling with the ghost of Christmas Present? Or why not consider how ignorance and want might also relate to this theme? Aren't they, after all, a sort of family? Them, the ghost of Christmas Present, and all of mankind? Or if you fancy doing more watching and reading, you could watch my videos about the Cratchits, Scrooge's family, and also the one called 5 Facts About Charles Dickens. Now, the first 2 videos just mentioned will give you a greater insight into 2 of the major families present in the story, whereas the third video will also reveal how Dickens might have drawn upon his own family when writing the novella. Furthermore, if you want some more contextual information, please do check out my bibliography down in the video description. A bibliography is just a list of sources basically, and the websites listed in my bibliography were all things that I read when preparing this video, and so there's bound to be some extra nuggets of wisdom on those web pages, which might help you out even more. Now, you've got plenty of options there, so if you're able to, give something a go. Alright then everyone, that is my discussion of the theme of family in A Christmas Carol complete. Honestly, I hope this video has been helpful for you and that you feel much more confident about this topic now. If my work has been helpful in any way, please do consider liking this video, adding a comment to let me know, subscribing if you aren't already, and sharing it with anyone else who you think might find it helpful. Doing any of those things will help me to help even more people, and as I've said earlier in this video, your support really does mean an awful lot to me. Anyway, as ever, I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are revising, please do remember to take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student, which is what I think you deserve to be. So why was Dickens so insistent on using the theme of family in his novella? Well, simply put, doing so allowed him to tap into Victorian sensibilities, which in turn enabled him to spread his socially conscious message among the middle and upper classes so much more successfully.